All right, now, can we together now look very closely at this poem and see how well the poet has brought the situation to life? I'm talking about how well the poet has used a lot of language techniques and poetic techniques to help to bring the situation of this game of hide and seek to life. And in fact, get us involved in it by especially engaging our senses. You know, when we say engaging our senses, we're thinking of the five senses, you know, the sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. And that's what you need to do in writing of your own. You should always try to get the senses of your reader activated by using various language techniques and helping to create this feeling where they're actually there. They're sort of immersed in the situation. If you're immersed, you are, as it were, covered by it or engulfed by it, or as it were, also, it's as if you've actually become, shall we say, put into some water, like a tea bag in a teacup. It's immersed. And that means you're fully involved in it. There's another word to add to your vocab. Now, let's start off together, looking at the poem in more detail. It starts off with some direct speech, quoted speech, when the speaker says, call out, I'm ready, come and find me. And that's used elsewhere in the poem too. For example, if you drop down to line 23, 24, you'll see that that's where the hider comes out and says, basically, I've won. So using direct speech here in the poem helps bring it to life. It's actually making the voice of the speaker seem to be more immediate, more present, as if we can hear it ourselves. Because the rest of the poem, of course, is really a form of narrative. It's simply a first-person narrative from the point of view of the hider, the speaker or persona telling us the story of the poem. So it starts off with a tone of excitement. I'm ready, come and find me. And that tone of excitement changes, especially at the end of the poem, of course. And we'll come to try to understand what words we could use to describe the tone there, because the word tone has to do with the feelings, the attitude that is expressed by a speaker or somebody who is telling us something. And so in this case, it's the feeling of excitement in the beginning. Notice that line 1 is also made up of 3 short sentences. Call out, call loud, I'm ready. We've talked about this. Sometimes short sentences are very effective in building up a sense of excitement or tension or suspense. And that's what they're doing here. Now, let's have a look at line 2. The sacks in the tool shed smell like the seaside. Who can tell me what technique jumps to mind when they read that line? Hannah, you were first. Hannah Gunn. Did you find out what technique it is, Hannah?
Simile.
Yes, it's a simile, isn't it? The first thing that strikes you about it is it's a simile, and it's also another technique, Olivia. What is it?
Alliteration.
Well done. See how quickly now you find these techniques compared to when you started at the beginning of the term. You're so good at it now, girl. So we've got the sacks in the tool shed smell like the seaside. Lots of S sounds, aren't there? And some of those S's actually occur elsewhere in the words, like at the end of the word sacks and in the middle of the word seaside. But most of them, of course, do occur at the beginning, and that makes it alliteration. When, we should keep this in mind, by the way, when there are consonant sounds that occur in a sequence or a series of words, but not at the beginning, then it can be called consonants, of course. Here, these sounds are not supposed to be very unpleasant, because quite often the S's being repeated is a sibilant sound, as we know, a sibilant, which means a hissing or a buzzing sound, doesn't it? If you don't remember that, it's in the chat now for you to record. So a sibilant sound means having a hissing or a buzzing sound, and quite often that's not supposed to be very pleasant. Like the hissing of a snake, you know, that sharp S sound is not pleasant, is it? And it's even menacing in a way. But in this case, it's not supposed to be unpleasant because it's a feeling of excitement. So really what it does, it captures for us the way the persona, it's almost as if they have to hush their own thoughts, as if they have to keep so quiet. They're speaking in whispers. And that's what the S's sound like. It's like they are whispers. By the way, there's a lovely word that means having a whispering quality, and it's susurrus or susurrant. Listen to the word itself, listen to it, susurrus. It's got that lovely sort of hissing quality. You can imagine it's like listening to the rubber of tires as they're going across the road, making that background hissing noise, like on cars or even a bicycle, for example. But here, I think the softer quality of these sounds, the muted ones, helps to create a feeling of a person who is really trying to be so quiet, whispering to themselves, even their thoughts. The sacks in the tool shed smell like the seaside. A nice simile, isn't it? I mean, I think we all like the seaside, so it makes it feel cozy in a way. They'll never find you in this salty dark. Now, that's a very unusual expression, salty dark. Of course, dark is appealing to the sense of sight, right? Dark has to do with sight. But salty, well, what sense does that appeal to? Raymond, what sense does salty appeal to?
Taste.
Yes. Remember that there is a word that I gave a while ago that means relating to the sense of taste, and it was gustatory. Is that right, everyone? Gustatory. And so in this case, salty dark is actually very cleverly merging appeals to two senses. So you've got sight and taste being brought together in a very unexpected way. This is a clever technique because it is unexpected and it makes you stop and think. Of course, there are sacks there, and I think that we can all imagine that the persona is hiding under the sacks. And so they're very close and you can smell and feel them. In this case, because the persona is covered by the sacks to hide, it's dark. But the saltiness, which is about taste and even maybe a tiny bit of smell, isn't it, really? It's also possibly a smell effect as well. And that word that means relating to the sense of smell, a more formal word. Does anyone remember what that word was, relating to the sense of smell? It's olfactory. Look at those two words that I've put down in the chat for you, which are words that mean relating to different senses. One is taste, gustatory, and the other is smell, olfactory. Now, there is another thing I have to mention here. This is really quite an advanced technique for you to learn, but I know you're clever enough to learn it with me and memorize it for the future. You can't really have a salty dark, can you? And if I said to you, for example, I was listening to a band playing some rather yellow music. Well, can you have yellow music? Not really. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Music isn't yellow. You can't see it. You can only hear it. But the color yellow is often associated with things that are rather bright and happy. Don't you think so? And so maybe that's what the meaning is here. Yellow music means that it's a happy, light, gay sort of music. And that's possible to do in writing, you know, and I want you to think about it for homework this time. Try one example of doing this, of combining two different sense appeals together to create a more interesting, shall we say, a richer sense effect. And when you do that, you're appealing to one sense through another. That means the main sense here is about darkness. It's the most overwhelming sense because sight is our main sense, but it's also being shaped by the word salty. So you're using really salty to help expand, to help to make the idea of darkness somehow more complex, richer. So our senses are very fully engaged because of those two words which catch two senses together. And when you do this, when you appeal to one sense through another sense, it's called synaesthesia. What an unusual word that is. And there it is in the chat, synaesthesia. You know, synaesthesia has basically two meanings. When we talk about it as a literary technique, that means a special way of writing to make your writing interesting, like metaphors and so on. It's just the same as using those other techniques that you already know, personification, simile, and so on, but it's a more interesting variation. And it's very difficult to achieve. We've got two today, salty, dark, and yellow music, okay? And it's called synaesthesia.